but most often it obfuscates and even sometimes subverts the Qur'an. And there are specific instances of this that I kind of explore in my research. And I think the reason for that is that the Qur'an, if we want to know what's in the mind of the prophets, then the Qur'an is a source we should look for. Now, of course, as believers, we believe that the Qur'an was inspired by God. But if we were historians, we would say, and even as Muslims, we admit that what came out of the mouth of the prophets, what was in the mind of the prophet and how came out of the mouth of the prophet was the Qur'an. And so that lets us know what the prophet was thinking, even though, again, the source of the Qur'an itself is inspired. So the prophet acts like a social reformer, a charismatic figure that upsets the status quo. And then once the prophet dies, then the forces of kind of business as usual will start to that will set back in, and then they will try to undo some of the kind of trajectory that the Qur'an is going in, because it's trying to break away from the status quo. So you have and the example that I give often is of a startup. So when you have a founder and they launch a new company, it's in that startup phase. It's very dynamic. It's trying to push against the grain. But then eventually it becomes a successful company, and then due to its success, it often starts taking on the characteristics of what it was opposing in the beginning. That's when the MBAs and the suits come in, and then it loses its startup quality that made it successful in the first place. Now it becomes successful in other ways, right? But in some ways it loses that initial dynamism, and that's what I think happens with religions and happened with Islam in particular. So the hadith is often what is used to subvert the Quranic trajectory, because the Quran is seen as too radical. So one example that we talked about recently on social media, on Twitter, is the example of lineage. So the Quran is opposed to judging people based on lineage, and says that we should only be judged on kind of quote unquote the content of our character, that is our merit. And this was a radical idea in a tribal society that's based all on lineage. So what happens that after the prophet dies, then you see kind of two streams emerge. One that continues in this way of going against lineage, but then there's another aspect that emerges, which is trying to reassert lineage. And then you have this concept of sayyids, who are like descendants of the prophets. You have, Arabs are superior to non-Arabs. This is in many hadiths, and in fact is now considered the official traditional opinion, that they have more merit than non-Arabs on average. But this is in tension with the other trajectory that the Quran set out in. So again, you have these kind of two trajectories. One is the Quranic trajectory, which is against lineage and about merit. And then you have this kind of status quo that preceded Islam and then is trying to reassert itself. You'll see both in the hadith literature. So yes, there are hadiths that say no Arab is superior to a non-Arab, and hadiths like this, which support the Quranic trajectory. But then there are other hadith, for example, that say that the Arabs are more noble on the whole, and that, for example, a very large, big example is that the leadership is only for the Quraysh, which is all based an idea based on lineage, not on merits. I believe that one of them is rooted in this Quranic trajectory, and one of them is the kind of status quo that's kind of rearing its ugly head. And you see both reflected in the hadith, and that's why we need the Quran as that furqan to judge these things and to only follow what is consistent with the Quranic trajectory.